The enormous evolutionary pressure that is placed upon us is nearly immeasurable if we stop to consider that none of our ancestors failed in their genetic transmissions, since otherwise we would not exist. Everything is competing, consciously or otherwise, for a temporary safe haven, realizing all too well how easy it is to be eliminated from the proceedings. It is no surprise, therefore, to realize that most of us never fully awaken to this horror show we call daily life. To emotionally feel this existential situation is literally unbearable and gives fuel to why Albert Camus could reasonably argue in the myth of Sisyphus with a straight face that there is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. All the rest, whether or not the world has 3 dimensions, whether the mind has 9 or 12 categories, comes afterwards. Shakespeare, writing centuries before, perhaps captured this human dilemma best when in the nunnery scene of the play Hamlet he writes, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Imagine you're going to ride on a brand new roller coaster, and once seated, you discover to your shock that the track hasn't yet been completed, and that at the very end of the ride, you will end up dying in a huge ball of fire. Further imagine that the roller coaster lasts for a set duration of time, an hour, a day, a year, or a decade. On such an up and down journey, you have 2 fundamental options. Jump early and die, or don't jump and die when it goes off the track. This is reminiscent of the opening sequence to the 1940s British movie, A Matter of Life and Death, where the main character is a British Royal Air Force pilot, played by David Niven, returning from a bombing run during World War II. However, his plane is critically damaged and on fire. He's confronted with 2 options: stay with the plane until he's burned alive, or jump and most certainly die from impact. In a much less dramatic context, and with longer time gestations, is this not our own situation? Metaphorically speaking, are we not also on that same ride in life, spinning as we do on a planet going some 60,000 plus miles an hour, year long around a massive object known as our sun? Do we not have to decide whether we wish to stay or jump on this global spacecraft? I think the simplest reason that there are thousands of religions around the world is due to meaning equivalence, which is that any meaning is better than no meaning, provided that such meaning makes one want to live an extra day. It is not really an issue of whether one particular religion is truer than another, or even that a particular religious system is simply made up, but rather that the believer finds something of value or solace in it. The theory of meaning equivalence helps explain why even the most bizarre of creation myths can be accepted as true by otherwise very rational and level-headed disciples. For instance, in Scientology, its founder L. Ron Hubbard has an elaborate schema which claims that Xenu was the dictator of the Galactic Confederacy, who 75 million years ago also brought billions of his people to Earth in a DC-8-like spacecraft, stacked them around volcanoes, and killed them with hydrogen bombs. Official Scientology scriptures hold that the immortal spirits of these aliens adhere to humans, causing spiritual harm. However, new creation stories are not any more bizarre than old ones. Being brought up in the Roman Catholic Church, I was taught almost from birth that thousands of years ago, if not millions, there lived 2 humans named Adam and Eve, who displeased God by eating from the tree of knowledge, even though they were forbidden by him to do so. However, a closer reading of Genesis shows that there was also another tree in the Garden of Eden called the tree of everlasting life, and because God feared that Adam and Eve, with their newfound knowledge, would soon discover its location and eat of its fruit and become like him, he cast them out of the garden and put an angel in a flame of fire to guard it, ostensibly forever. What overall purpose do these narratives serve, particularly if one cannot verify the respective truth claims? They provide an overarching narrative in which to explain why the world is so perplexing and help position one's relative place within it. These are contextual stories that ultimately give one purpose in a cosmos that seems devoid of any. The problem, though, is that reflecting before projecting, though it is a wondrous survival tool, carries an unforeseen downside. To the degree that I am freer than other animals to directionally ponder in my mind unimagined scenarios, it allows me to better adapt to unexpected future outcomes. But this same freedom also opens me up to imagine my own death and those of others that I am attached to and love. A dog doesn't appear to meditate on how distant stars will die and transform into black holes, or how universes may appear and disappear over eons of time. Yet, as humans with enlarged brains, we evolved to ponder all sorts of imponderables, and thus our Darwinian gift is also at times our Darwinian curse.
So, what is the single most fundamental choice any of us will ever make? Today, we're diving deep into one of life's biggest questions, and we're going to use a really powerful philosophical argument to understand the very decision to exist. Okay, let's jump right in. It all starts with a line that pretty much everyone knows, right? But we're not just going to quote it and move on. No, we're going to treat it as the single most important question ever asked. Why? Because, as you're about to see, absolutely everything else depends on how you answer it. But before we get tangled up in the philosophy, we have to start with the biology. Let's ground this big existential question in a fact about your own existence that is, well, it's truly staggering. I mean, really think about this for a second. Every living thing is locked in this constant, non-stop battle for survival. It's a relentless, incredibly high-stakes game where the default outcome is, well, it's elimination. And that game has been playing out for billions and billions of years. And this number, this is where it gets just completely mind-bending. For you to be here right now, listening to this, the number of your direct ancestors who failed to pass on their genes is 0, a big fat 0. Not a single one, all the way back to the very first spark of life. It is a perfect, totally unbroken chain of survival. That's just incredible. So when you consider that constant, absolutely brutal competition, you can kind of understand why most of us don't really awaken to this, let's call it an existential horror show. Because to truly feel that pressure every single moment of every single day, it would be completely unbearable. And this is where things get really fascinating. Because that raw biological drive to survive is one thing. But what happens when consciousness, when self-awareness finally enters the picture? You see, this awareness is exactly what led the philosopher Albert Camus to make a stunning claim in The Myth of Sisyphus. He argued there's only one truly serious philosophical problem. It's not about the nature of the universe or the meaning of justice. Nope. It's about suicide. For Camus, it all boils down to this one simple judgment. Is life worth living? He believed that everything else, science, ethics, art, that's all secondary. You have to answer this question for yourself first. Now, to make this idea a little less abstract and a lot more visceral, let's use a really powerful and, frankly, a pretty terrifying metaphor. Imagine this. You're on a brand new roller coaster. You're strapped in tight, but as it lurches forward and starts to climb, you look ahead and you see, to your absolute shock, that the track is incomplete. It just ends. You know with 100% certainty that this ride will end in a huge ball of fire. And in that horrifying moment, your choices are stripped down to just two. You can jump now, or you can stay on the ride. But either way, you know exactly how it's going to end. The outcome is the same. And believe it or not, this isn't just some made-up thought experiment. This exact choice is echoed in the opening scene of a classic British movie from the 1940s called A Matter of Life and Death. So, in the film, a pilot's plane is critically damaged and it's on fire. He's faced with two awful options: stay with the plane until he's burned alive, or jump without a parachute and die from the impact. It's a terrifying, no-win situation that is a perfect mirror of that roller coaster. Okay, so we've got these two powerful metaphors. Now let's bring this all home and connect it directly to our own lives, right here, right now. So let's just ask the question directly. If you take away the drama, if you stretch out the time frame, isn't this our situation? Metaphorically speaking, aren't we all on that very same ride? Let's just reframe our reality for a moment. We are on a global spacecraft, our planet Earth, spinning through the void at over 60,000 miles an hour, on a year-long journey around the sun. It's a ride with a known finite duration for every single passenger. And so we end right where we began, with a question that is now yours, and only yours, to answer. On this ride, on this global spacecraft, knowing the track ahead is incomplete, do you choose to stay? The very fact you're here listening to this means that up until this very moment, your answer has been yes. Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever just stopped and wondered how it's possible for thousands of completely different, often contradictory, belief systems to exist all at the same time? I mean, from different gods to totally opposing philosophies, humanity is just packed with these mutually exclusive truths. Well, today, we're going to unpack a pretty fascinating theory that tries to explain exactly why. Okay, so let's dive right into the central puzzle that our source material, an essay by Professor David Lane, is trying to solve. When you look at it, it seems like a total paradox, right? How can so many stories that literally cancel each other out all claim to be the one and only truth? And believe it or not, the theory offers a surprisingly simple two-word answer. Our goal here is to unpack exactly what meaning equivalence means and why it might just be a master key to understanding a huge part of human nature. But first, before we can really get the answer, we have to understand the stakes. Because the need for belief, well, it isn't some casual thing, like picking a favorite color. No, it's a deep-seated survival mechanism, and it was forged in response to some pretty immense existential pressure. The argument in the essay is that if we were to look at life with, total unfiltered clarity, the evolutionary pressure is so intense, this constant, relentless struggle for survival, that it would be almost unbearable. It's a horror show that we're biologically programmed to distract ourselves from. A guy who really nailed this was the philosopher Albert Camus. He basically argued that before you can ask what the world is or how it works, you have to answer a much more basic question first. Is life itself actually worth living? And hey, this is not some new idea. We're talking centuries earlier. Shakespeare's Hamlet wrestled with this exact same human dilemma. It's the ultimate choice, isn't it? Do you endure all the pain that comes with being alive? Or do you just opt out? The fact that most of us, day in and day out, choose to endure, well, that suggests something really powerful is going on. Okay, so if we're all facing this constant existential crisis, how on earth do we cope? How do we keep choosing to be? Well, according to the source, our minds come factory installed with a pretty extraordinary survival kit. The essay proposes we're born with something it calls a meaning positioning system, or MPS, and you should really think of it like a psychological GPS. In a world filled with just chaotic information and sensory overload, our MPS helps us find our bearings. It gives us a direction, a reason to keep moving forward. To really hammer home how vital this system is, the author tells this personal story about having a sudden severe vertigo attack. And it's a perfect analogy. The physical world became completely unnavigable. He argues that a loss of meaning is the psychological equivalent of that, a mental vertigo so disorienting you literally can't stand up. Now, a key tool in this survival kit, and this is pretty wild when you think about it, is that our mind functions as a virtual simulator. Most of the time, our consciousness isn't even in the present moment, is it? It's busy running what-if scenarios, replaying things from the past, and making all sorts of plans for the future. This internal feeder is a huge evolutionary advantage. I mean, we can practice a tough conversation or plan an escape route without any real-world risk at all. But, and this is a huge but, there's a major drawback. This same powerful machine can just as easily trap us in fantasies and delusions. And it's from this amazing capacity for fantasy that all our grand narratives, our belief systems, are born. Okay, so let's connect the dots here. We've got this fundamental biological need for an answer to that to be or not to be question. And we've got this incredibly powerful mental simulator that can literally generate entire worlds inside our heads. This is where the theory of meaning equivalence comes into play. And this really gets to the absolute core of it. From a purely survivalist, evolutionary point of view, the most important job of a belief system isn't to be factually correct. Nope. Its number one job is simply to make you want to live another day. And that, right there, is meaning equivalence. The theory suggests that the act of believing is the real motivating force. So, two completely contradictory belief systems can be functionally equivalent if they both succeed at giving their followers a compelling reason to get out of bed in the morning and face that horror show. This goes a long way to explain why stories that might sound, well, frankly bizarre or totally unverifiable to an outsider can provide such profound comfort, structure, and purpose to millions and millions of people. Let's look at a few examples the source material lays out. I mean, just look at these origin stories side by side. You've got masters from Venus, a galactic dictator, a forbidden fruit. Factually speaking, they can't all be true. But the theory of meaning equivalence would say, hold on, you're asking the wrong question. Functionally, they all do the exact same job. They provide a grand narrative that gives believers a place and a purpose in a really perplexing cosmos. So, when you boil it all down, these meaning systems are all about function. You should think of them less as a crystal clear window into reality and more like an essential buffer. They're the psychological tools that help us keep our balance on what the author calls the informational tightrope of life. You know, one of the author's students actually described this delicate balance perfectly. It's this razor's edge we're all walking on. We need just enough reality to function in the world, but we also need a story to buffer us from the full, sometimes crushing weight of it all. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to chew on. If this theory is on the right track, then a belief system's primary job isn't to be factually true, but simply to keep you alive. It's a survival tool first, and maybe a truth-seeking device second. So the real question becomes, where do your own beliefs, whether they're religious, philosophical, or something else entirely, where do they fall on that spectrum between being a buffer and being reality? It's definitely something worth thinking about. Have you ever really stopped to think about where religion comes from? Not a specific one, but the very first spark of belief itself. We're going to take a journey way back, tens of thousands of years, to look for the first whispers of the sacred. The clues are buried deep, just waiting for us. So, I want you to just forget everything you think you know. We're stepping into a world lit only by firelight, a world absolutely ruled by mystery. This isn't just a history lesson. This is the very beginning of our human quest for meaning. All right, so where do we even begin our investigation? Well, we don't start with ancient texts or scrolls. We start with the clues that our most ancient ancestors left behind in the earth itself, the very first physical signs of symbolic thought. This timeline, it just gives you a sense of the staggering depth of this story. We're starting 60,000 years ago with a Neanderthal burial that seems to hint at some kind of ritual. Then we jump way forward to these incredible deep earth art galleries with sacred stories being painted right onto the cave walls. Each of these points is a huge leap in how we think. So in a place called Shanidar Cave, archaeologists found something, well, incredible. In the grave of a Neanderthal, they found the pollen of flowers, brightly colored flowers like yarrow and hyacinth. Think about that. This wasn't just getting rid of a body, this was a gesture. It suggests that even 60,000 years ago, death was an event, something to be marked with care, and maybe with meaning. To really get into their heads, you have to understand animism. This wasn't some formal religion, it was just a way of seeing the world. The wind wasn't just wind, it could be a presence. A river wasn't just water, it had a will. The whole world was alive. Because you had a mind, it just made sense that the big oak tree or the thunder had one too. And that leads us to these breathtaking cave paintings. You have to understand, these weren't art galleries for people to stroll through. No way. Imagine being deep inside the earth, the images of bison and lions flickering by torchlight, maybe the sound of drumming echoing off the walls. This was a stage for ceremony, a place to turn the hunt into a cosmic drama and weave the stories of the tribe right into the rock itself. Okay, so we've seen the physical evidence, the clues in the ground, but that just begs the question, right? What was going on inside the human mind? What kind of cognitive software was running that made all of this possible in the first place? Well, one of the leading theories has this great name, the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device, or HAD. It's basically a cognitive shortcut. Our brains evolved to assume that when something happens, an agent, a creature, a person, something with a mind, caused it. Why? Because that assumption kept us alive. You hear a rustle in the grass. It's probably just the wind, but it could be a predator. You see, natural selection made a very simple, very crucial bet. If you mistake the wind for a lion, what does it cost you? A moment of fear, a little adrenaline. But if you mistake a lion for the wind, that costs you everything. So our brains got wired to err on the side of caution, to see agency everywhere. And from there, it's a pretty short leap to sensing unseen spirits, ancestors, or even gods. And then there's this other incredibly powerful driver. We are, as far as we know, the only species on this planet that is fully consciously aware that we are going to die. And that knowledge, well, it can be terrifying. Terror management theory suggests that our cultures, and especially our religious beliefs, evolved as this amazing defense mechanism against that existential dread. So religion basically became a kind of existential technology. Think about it. Burial rites bring everyone together to manage the pain of loss. Myths and stories give a sense of order to a chaotic, unpredictable universe. The hope of an afterlife soothes our grief. And the idea of symbolic immortality, that you'll live on through your children or your tribe or your great deeds, makes the finality of it all a little more bearable. Okay, so we have these deep, hardwired cognitive impulses. But how did those personal feelings, that awe, that fear, that sense of agency scale up? How do you get from a personal feeling to an organized institution that can build massive temples? In those early societies, the specialist in all this was the shaman. Now, this wasn't a priest in a fancy building. This was someone who directly communicated with the spirit world. And their journey often followed a pattern. It would start with a crisis, like a serious illness or a near-death experience. That would lead to a trance, an ecstatic flight to another reality. And they would come back with some kind of power, healing, wisdom, a prophecy for the tribe. They were living, breathing proof that the invisible world was real and could be accessed. And now we come to a moment in time, a discovery that completely rewrote our understanding of history. The year is 9,500 BCE. Get this, that's more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge was built. And at this moment, something absolutely revolutionary was being built at a site in modern-day Turkey. This place is called Göbekli Tepe. And what's so mind-blowing about it is that this massive, complex temple was built by hunter-gatherers before they had invented farming, before they had permanent villages. The old theory was always people settle down, build cities, and then they build temples. This site flips that completely on its head. It suggests the powerful human urge to gather for ritual might have been the very spark that drove us to invent farming and build the first cities. The temple might have actually come before the town. This moment marks a massive shift in how we experience the sacred. Look at the shaman. Their authority came from direct personal experience, what they saw in their trance. But as societies got bigger, a priesthood emerged, and their authority wasn't personal. It came from an institution, a formal text. Religion scaled up from the small tribe to the huge city-state, and it became formal, structured, hierarchical. And you really see this in ancient Sumer. The great ziggurats, these massive temples, weren't just places to pray. They were the center of the entire economy. They were the banks, the granaries, the administrative hubs. The priests managed taxes, food rations, and even the invention of writing itself, which probably started as a way to keep track of temple offerings. Theology and power had fused into one. So what does any of this ancient history have to do with us, today and the modern world? Well, it turns out these incredibly deep-seated impulses, they're still a huge part of who we are. Modern neuroscience actually gives us this fascinating window into it. Researchers scanned the brains of Franciscan nuns while they were deep in prayer, and they saw that the part of the brain that defines the boundaries of the self, the part that tells you where you end and the rest of the world begins, it went quiet. And as it goes quiet, that sense of separation just dissolves, creating this powerful feeling of unity, of transcendence. It seems our brains are literally built for these experiences. And this ability probably gave us a real evolutionary advantage. Experiences of self-transcendence can dramatically reduce stress, which improves our health. They can boost creativity by letting our brains make new connections. And when we have these experiences together in rituals, it creates these powerful bonds of empathy and cohesion, welding us into a group that is way stronger than just a collection of individuals. Ultimately, that's what connects us to that Neanderthal carefully placing flowers on a grave and to the hunter-gatherers who built Göbekli Tepe. It's the quest itself. We are a species that looks up at a vast, silent cosmos and feels this overwhelming compulsion to answer back, with songs, with carvings, with massive structures, and with belief. From that very first ritual burial, all the way to our own modern search for purpose, this sacred quest continues. The world has changed beyond recognition, but that fundamental human impulse to reach for something larger than ourselves, that hasn't gone anywhere. The only real question is, where in your own life do you still hear that ancient echo?